He saved dryer 8 for me every Thursday. I started doing laundry on Thursday nights because Saturday mornings had become too quiet after Daniel moved out. I expected 40 minutes of fluorescent light, the steady churn of other people's clothes, and exactly no conversation beyond asking whether a cart was free. Then on my third Thursday at Spin City, a man I had never met put his hand on dryer 8 and told me he'd been saving it for me. I realize that sounds territorial, he said, but I mean it in a generous way. He was standing between two battered orange carts, one of which held a neat stack of black t-shirts and the other a canvas tool bag with coils of cable poking out. He had dark curls that looked recently flattened by a knit cap, warm brown skin, and a face that seemed built for expressions he was trying not to make. At that moment, he was trying not to smile. I looked from him to the dryer. A piece of blue painter's tape marked the number 8 above its round glass door. Does it come with a deed? No, but it runs 7 degrees cooler than the others. That is alarmingly specific. I saw what happened to your sweater 2 weeks ago. So he had met me in a sense, or at least he had witnessed the memorial service for my favorite charcoal sweater, which had gone into dryer 11 as an adult garment and emerged suitable for a thoughtful 10-year-old. I had held it up by the shoulders while Leela, the Thursday night attendant, offered condolences from behind the counter. The stranger nodded toward my laundry basket. The same sweater sat on top because I had not yet accepted that it was beyond help. You brought it back, he said. I thought being near the place where it died might give us closure. That got the smile he had been holding back. It changed his whole face without making it look less tired. He explained that dryer 8's thermostat ran cool and its timer was honest, two qualities he valued in appliances and people. He had arrived 10 minutes before me, seen the laundromat filling up, and used 7 so 8 would still be available. 7 made a high metallic squeak every 9th turn. You took the loud one for a stranger, I asked. For the sweater, he said, you're still under review. I put my wet clothes into 8, Caleb Mercer. Jonah Reyes, he offered his hand, then glanced at the detergent streak on his fingers and changed course into a small wave. Probably safer. I liked that he noticed things, the residue on his own hand, the sweater, the temperature difference between machines. I noticed things for a living too, although most of mine were trapped in magnetic tape and brittle lacquer discs at the city archive. At 30, I was the youngest audio restoration editor on a small conservation team, which sounded as if I repaired music. Most days I removed electrical hum from zoning meetings and tried to make the mayor of 1964 intelligible through 40 years of dust. Jonah's dryer squealed. He turned his head on the exact 9th rotation. You counted, I said. I work in theater. Repetition is either a cue or a problem. He was a freelance lighting designer and technician, currently working on a small production 3 neighborhoods over. He told me this while we sat in molded plastic chairs beneath a television playing a cooking competition with the captions on. Every few minutes he looked toward his dryer, not impatiently, just attentively, as though the machine had been assigned a role and might miss an entrance. I had planned to read emails. Instead, I learned that Jonah carried 3 kinds of tape, hated overhead lighting in restaurants on principle, and believed every laundromat had one machine the regulars quietly protected from newcomers. I told him the archive basement was kept cold enough to preserve both recordings and grudges. When dryer 8 stopped, my sweater was still too small, but it had not become smaller. Jonah examined it from a respectful distance. Stability, that's progress. A beautiful foundation for any relationship. His eyes returned to mine. It lasted no more than a second, but the joke acquired a second meaning while it hung between us. Then Leela announced that the laundromat was closing in 15 minutes, and we both stood too quickly. Outside, the pavement was dark from an earlier rain. Jonah lifted his tool bag onto one shoulder. I turned toward the subway. He turned the other way. Next Thursday, he asked like he was confirming a practical detail. I own other clothes, I said. Good dryer 8 has standards. I walked home with the shrunken sweater folded on top of my clean laundry and found myself smiling at it, which was the first useful thing it had done in weeks. The following Thursday, Jonah was already there. He had taken 7 again. Its squeak cut through the room at regular intervals, and he was eating something from a paper bag while reading a lighting manual. Dryer 8 stood empty. "This is how rumors start," I said. He looked up. "You're 7 minutes late." "You don't have my schedule." "Apparently I do." He moved his canvas bag off the chair beside him. I loaded 8, then sat down. The paper bag smelled like cumin, warm dough, and onions. Jonah caught me noticing. "Empanadas. Is this part of the appliance protection program?" "No, my aunt believes being unmarried at 32 is a nutritional emergency. I have 6. I accepted one. In return, I gave him the detergent pod he had forgotten to add to his second load. He stared through the washer door at his clothes turning in untreated water. "I was testing you," he said. And unpleasantly observant. We ate from the bag between us. The empanadas were still warm, and Jonah tore the last one in half without asking which of us wanted it. It was a small act, almost automatic, but he checked that the halves were even before handing me mine. That night I told him more about the archive. I described a box of tapes from a neighborhood radio station that had gone off the air in 1987. Most were labeled only with dates. My job was to identify voices, repair breaks, remove noise, and preserve the original recording without polishing away its character. "So you decide which imperfections are important," Jonah said. "That's the generous version. The less generous version is that I spend 6 hours deciding whether a low buzz is history or a broken cable. In my work, it's usually a broken cable." He opened his tool bag and showed me a collection of adapters, clamps, gloves, and colored gels in plastic sleeves. The organization was meticulous except for a crushed granola bar at the bottom. "Emergency ration," he said. "It looks archaeological." "You're the expert." When my dryer finished, Jonah reached for one end of my fitted sheet. I held the other. "Do you know how to fold these?" he asked. "No one knows. There are only competing belief systems." I watched a video. His method failed at the 3rd corner. Mine failed at the 1st. We ended with something roughly rectangular and laughed hard enough that Leela looked over her glasses at us. "You two planning to sleep here?" she called. "Not on this sheet," I said. "It has structural problems." Jonah's laughter softened into a grin that stayed when he looked at me. For the first time since Daniel and I had separated, I became aware of wanting to be seen by someone new, not admired from across a room or approved of in general. Seen in the specific, inconvenient way Jonah seemed to see things. Outside, he offered me the remaining empanadas. "Your aunt's emergency," I reminded him. "She has reserves." We stood beneath the laundromat awning while a bus sighed at the corner. I took the bag. Our fingers touched around the folded paper top, and neither of us behaved as if it had been an accident worth apologizing for. "Same time next week?" Jonah asked. "I'll try to respect the schedule you invented for me." Dryer 8 appreciates punctuality. That was the first miniaturized version of our Thursday ritual. He saved the cooler dryer, I supplied whatever he had forgotten, and we split something neither of us had intended to share. It should have felt incidental. Instead, by Wednesday afternoon, I was checking whether the shirt I wanted to wear was already clean. On the 3rd Thursday, I arrived before Jonah. Dryer 8 was in use by a woman with 3 children and a mountain of towels, so I took 7. I had just started it when Jonah came in carrying his laundry and 2 cartons of noodles. He looked at 7, then at me. "What happened?" "Democracy." He followed my glance to the family's towels and nodded. A flawed system, but probably the right outcome. We put his clothes in washer 4 and ate noodles from the cartons while my dryer squealed. Jonah had brought an extra pair of chopsticks. I did not mention that this suggested planning. He did not mention that I had brought 2 cans of sparkling water. The laundromat was busier than usual. A college student slept with his head against a vending machine. An older man folded undershirts with military precision. The children chased each other around the orange carts until Leela redirected them with a box of dryer sheets and an invented sorting job. Jonah watched her turn chaos into cooperation. Good stage manager. You evaluate everyone by theater department. Only when they're competent. Where do I fall? He considered this with enough seriousness to make me regret asking. Sound department. Quiet until something is wrong, then suddenly the only person who matters. That's disturbingly flattering. Don't get used to it. His current production was a new play called Second Landing, being staged in a 60-seat theater above an old pharmacy. The set consisted of 2 kitchen chairs, a painted window, and a door that could not support its own weight. Jonah had spent 3 days trying to make the light outside the painted window look like late afternoon in November. Does the audience know it's November? I asked. They know if I do my job. And if you don't, they think it's an unusually emotional Tuesday. I wanted to see him work. The desire surprised me because I had spent years declining invitations that required leaving my routine. With Daniel, there had always been a reasonable excuse: an early morning, groceries to buy, a documentary we had already started. We had loved each other. I believed that without qualification. We had simply stopped making choices that proved it. By the time we admitted it, our life together had become a well-maintained waiting room. I did not tell Jonah all of that. I told him I had recently left a long relationship and was still learning what to do with Thursdays. He wound noodles around his chopsticks. Laundry is a bold first experiment. I considered salsa dancing, but this has clearer instructions. His smile faded only slightly. How recent? 4 months since he moved out, longer since we were honest about it. Jonah nodded, not in sympathy exactly, and not with the eager curiosity people sometimes brought to a breakup. Do you still want him back? The directness did not feel invasive. It felt like a door he was holding open, with room for me to walk through or not. No, I said. I want to stop using what happened as proof that I'm better off never choosing anything difficult. Jonah looked down at his carton. That sounds harder than salsa dancing. The shoes are cheaper. He told me his last relationship had ended almost a year earlier. Mateo had moved to Seattle for work. They had tried long distance for 14 months, always talking about the life they would have when one of them eventually moved. Neither did. Jonah wanted a home built out of ordinary days, not a relationship sustained entirely by airport arrivals and good intentions. There wasn't a villain, he said. That made it take longer to leave. People are inconsiderate that way. Refusing to become simple. Exactly. Dryer 8 opened behind us. The woman removed towels warm enough to steam the glass, and Jonah immediately reached for his wet laundry. Your machine is free, I said. I don't need the cool ones. I know. He met my eyes, then chose 9. It was a small correction to the story I had been telling myself. He was not obsessed with Dryer 8. He was saving it because it mattered to me. When we left, Jonah walked with me toward the subway even though it took him 3 blocks out of his way. At the entrance, he pulled out his phone. In case one of us is late, he said. The dryers must be protected. This is serious infrastructure. We exchanged numbers. His first text arrived before I reached the platform. Jonah, 7 squeaked 8 times after you left. I think it misses you. I wrote back that attachment to unreliable machinery was his private business. The next week, our messages remained practical for almost a day. Jonah sent a photo of a lighting fixture with the caption historic HUM or broken cable. I told him I would need a grant and 6 months to determine that. I sent him a 3-second audio clip of a councilman sneezing in 1972. Jonah rated the timing excellent, but the emotional motivation unclear. By Sunday, we were no longer pretending the messages were about work. We still did not call it flirting. I was not sure what official committee handled that classification, and Jonah seemed content to let evidence accumulate. On the fourth Thursday, he saved dryer 8 by sitting in front of it with a paperback while 7 and 9 both stood empty. "This is more theatrical than necessary," I said. "You were 3 minutes late. I had to establish stakes." I had brought dumplings from a place near the archive. Jonah held up a bag of oranges. "We have accidentally made a balanced meal. If we eat the oranges, let's not overcommit." We sat at the folding table instead of the plastic chairs. Our knees bumped beneath it twice. The first time we moved apart, the second time neither of us did. Jonah told me Second Landing opened Saturday. He said it casually while peeling an orange in one continuous spiral. "You should come," he added, "if you want." I speared a dumpling and pretended to study it. The invitation felt larger than the room required. Would I understand the November light? "I can provide an annotated program." "Then yes." He gave me the address and refused to let me pay for a ticket, explaining that the production had already compensated him with 2 seats and half a sandwich. I agreed on the condition that I could buy him food afterward. "That sounds suspiciously like a plan," he said. "I've made them before. Recently." I looked at him. Saturday at 7:30, Jonah. There he is. The dryer doors turned behind him, catching bands of fluorescent light. He was wearing a dark green overshirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. There was a small burn mark near one cuff, probably from work. I wanted to touch it, which was an absurdly specific desire to have beside a pile of damp socks. Instead, I asked what I should wear to a 60-seat theater above a pharmacy. "Clothes," he said, "preferably ones dryer 8 hasn't rejected." Friday afternoon, my supervisor, Priya, stopped beside my workstation with an email open on her phone. The North Atlantic Sound Institute in Boston offered a 3-month archival residency every autumn. I had applied 6 months earlier, when Daniel and I were still dividing books and deciding who kept the good saucepan. The residency would give me access to equipment our city archive could not afford, and time to restore a collection of immigrant radio broadcasts I had been cataloging for 2 years. I had made the shortlist. "They want an updated work sample by Monday," Priya said. "This is excellent, Caleb." It was excellent. I knew that before she finished the sentence. I also knew the residency began in 5 weeks. I thanked her, opened the email, and felt the neat shape of the next 3 months appear in front of me. Housing provided, travel stipend, a studio with calibrated monitors, everything specified except what Jonah might think. We had known each other for 4 Thursdays. I told myself that fact made the news irrelevant to him. Then I spent 20 minutes editing a text I never sent. Saturday's theater really was above an old pharmacy. A narrow staircase led to a lobby with exposed brick and a volunteer pouring wine into plastic cups. The room smelled of dust, paint, and something electrical warming up. Jonah appeared through a black curtain wearing work pants, a headset, and the same green overshirt from the laundromat. He looked surprised for half a second when he saw me, though I had said I was coming. "You found it." The pharmacy was a strong clue. He touched my elbow as he guided me away from the stairwell. The contact was brief and practical, but his hand stayed for the final step after the path was clear. "I have to disappear before the show," he said. "Afterward, don't leave, even if the actors bow for a suspiciously long time." "How long is suspicious?" You'll know. From my seat in the third row, I could see Jonah's console at the back of the room. Once the play began, I stopped looking at him. That was partly because the actors were good and partly because his work made him vanish. The painted window held gray afternoon light. A kitchen bulb warmed when one character lied and cooled when the other finally answered. I did not know whether anyone else consciously registered those changes. I only knew the room felt different after each one. Near the end, the two characters sat in separate chairs without speaking. The light narrowed until the empty space between them looked like something solid. Then one actor moved her chair 6 inches closer, and the entire room seemed to release her. I thought about the shortlist email in my inbox. After the bows, Jonah found me in the lobby. The headset was gone, and his curls had sprung loose again. Well, he asked. It was definitely November. Thank God. Also beautiful. He accepted that without pretending it meant less than it did. I'm glad you came. We walked to a diner that served breakfast all night. Jonah ordered pancakes. I ordered a sandwich and then ate a third of his pancakes because he had predicted I would. We talked about the play, then about nothing that could be listed afterward. The worst apartments we had lived in, whether birds understood windows, why every family had one person who stored gift bags indefinitely. At midnight, the diner staff began stacking chairs on the empty side of the room. Outside, the air had turned cool. We stood beneath the red glow of the diner sign, neither of us moving toward the subway. Jonah put his hands in his coat pockets. Can I ask you something without making Saturday weird? That depends heavily on the question. He smiled, but his voice stayed steady. Can I kiss you? There were many answers I had avoided in my life by asking for more time, more information, or a clearer forecast. This one did not require any of those. Yes, I said. He stepped closer slowly enough that I could have changed my mind. His hand rested at the side of my neck, warm against the cold air, and he kissed me with a gentleness that made the moment feel deliberate rather than fragile. When we separated, his forehead touched mine for a second. Still weird, he asked. A little. Bad weird. No, more like finding out a laundromat has a private dining program. He laughed and I kissed him again. On the train home, I opened Jonah's contact, then the residency email, then Jonah's contact again. I could have told him in a sentence. Instead, I decided I would tell him if I became a finalist, as though the shortlist were not already the exact information honesty required. The fifth Thursday was different in ways neither of us named. Jonah had saved dryer 8, but this time he stood when I came in. He kissed my cheek near the corner of my mouth, subtle enough for a public room and unmistakable enough that I almost dropped my detergent. Leela watched from the counter. About time, she said. There was an approval process, Jonah told her. Government works, I added. We had spent Sunday walking through a street market and Tuesday eating soup in my apartment. Thursday still felt separate, our original territory. Jonah put his shirts in washer 4. I loaded 8 when my cycle finished. We shared sesame buns and folded clothes while our shoulders touched. My residency interview had taken place that morning. It had gone well. The panel wanted to know whether I could begin on the 1st of October, and I had said yes before the question was complete. At Spin City, Jonah told me his theater had asked him to design 2 more shows through December. He was pleased because the work was close enough that he could sleep in his own bed. The previous year, he had spent 4 months touring with a production, waking in hotel rooms that all had the same framed print above the desk. I kept forgetting which city I was in, he said. It turns out glamour has a lot of beige carpeting. So you're staying local. Aggressively, I bought basil. He showed me a photo of a small plant on his kitchen windowsill. It had 4 leaves and the burdened look of something already expected to represent stability. That's practically a mortgage, I said. Exactly. The residency sat behind my teeth. I could feel it each time the conversation paused. but telling him then seemed cruelly timed, as if I would be responding to his happiness about staying with news that I might leave. So I asked about the basil. Later, walking toward the subway, Jonah took my hand. He did it without ceremony, threading his fingers through mine as we waited for the light. "Are we only good at Thursdays?" he asked. "Tuesday soup was respectable." "I'm serious." "I know." The traffic light changed. We crossed with our hands still joined. "I don't want to rush you," he said. "I also don't want to pretend this is accidental because that feels safer." I thought of Daniel and the years in which we had both assumed silence meant agreement. This isn't accidental. "Okay." He squeezed my hand once. It was not a demand for a definition. It was an acknowledgement that we were already responsible for what we were making. That was the moment to tell him about Boston. I said, "Do you want to come over Saturday?" Jonah looked pleased. "Yes." I hated the relief that followed. Saturday I cooked pasta and oversalted the sauce. Jonah brought wine and the basil plant because my kitchen window had better light. We ate at my small table and he stayed until morning. Nothing about the night crossed the line we had not discussed. We kissed, talked, fell asleep fully dressed under the blanket on my sofa, and woke with stiff necks and Jonah's hand resting loosely over mine. The ordinary tenderness of it made my omission worse. On the sixth Thursday, Dryer 8 had a handwritten sign taped across its door, reserved for historical textiles. I stared at Jonah. He was sitting beneath it with an expression of professional innocence. Leela approved the wording. From the counter, Leela said, "I did not." I peeled off the sign and folded it into my pocket. Evidence of community service, of dryer fraud. That evening, the laundromat was nearly empty. Rain ticked against the front windows, turning the street beyond them into smears of red brake lights and white storefronts. Jonah had brought tomato sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. I had brought 2 slices of almond cake from a bakery near work. We ate slowly, delaying the folding because neither of us wanted to leave. Jonah was programming the cue sequence for a one-night benefit performance the following Thursday. The theater's old control system disliked imported files and sometimes replaced carefully built lighting transitions with what he called aggressive surprise darkness. "You should stop by," he said. "Rehearsal is open, in the sense that no one will remove you if you sit quietly in the back." A compelling invitation. "I mean it. Come before laundry if you want, or after. I'll be there from 5 until 10. You'll miss your constitutional appointment with Dryer 7. I'm planning to leave at 7, wash clothes, and go back for the final run." That sounds inefficient. It is. I contain multitudes and poor scheduling. I told him I would probably come after laundry. The invitation was clear, not the vague politeness people offered when they hoped you would understand not to accept. While we folded, Jonah asked whether I had plans for autumn. The question was not suspicious. We had been discussing his upcoming shows and autumn was 5 weeks away. I held one of his black t-shirts by the shoulders. "Work mostly. The archive never sleeps. It closes at 6. A healthy boundary." I folded the shirt and placed it on his stack. The lie was not in my answer. I would be working. The lie was in presenting a partial truth as the whole one. That night after Jonah left my apartment, I wrote the residency news in a message. I read it 3 times and saved it as a draft. I told myself I wanted to say it in person. That was true. It was also true that I had just spent 3 hours with him in person. The next Thursday, Jonah was not at Spin City. Dryer 8 stood empty, but it did not look saved. There was no canvas tool bag on the chair, no paper bag on the folding table, no paperback turned face down beside a pile of black t-shirts. I checked my phone. My last message to Jonah on my way to our highly regulated facility had been delivered but not read. "Did Jonah come in?" I asked Leela. She was counting quarters into paper rolls. "Haven't seen him." I loaded washer 4 because it was available and immediately felt foolish for choosing his machine. I moved my clothes to 5 before starting it, which felt more foolish. At 7:15, I texted, "Everything okay?" At 7:30, I put my clothes into dryer 8. It ran with its usual low, uneven hum. I sat in our plastic chairs and tried to read an article about adhesive failure in quarter-inch tape. The same paragraph passed in front of me 4 times without becoming information. Jonah had missed one Thursday. He was a freelance theater technician, not a lighthouse keeper. Nothing in our arrangement required him to report his location. Still, his absence removed more from the room than one person should have been able to carry. I realized I had organized the week around seeing him. I had bought 2 spinach pies. I had worn the blue shirt he once said made me look less like I lived underground. I had collected a story about an archive donor who labeled 12 reels miscellaneous important in case Jonah would appreciate the contradiction. The routine mattered because Jonah did. That truth was embarrassingly plain. At 8, Leela began wiping the machines. "You're going to burn a hole in that chair." He said he had rehearsal. Then maybe he has rehearsal. He said he was coming here. Leela looked at me over the top of her glasses. "And you're asking me because you have institutional knowledge. I know which people leave tissues in their pockets. Go ask the man yourself." The theater was 12 minutes away by train. I had been explicitly invited to the rehearsal. I repeated that fact while transferring warm clothes into my bag because I had no intention of turning concern into permission to appear wherever Jonah happened to be. His messages still showed unread. I took the train. The lobby door was unlocked. Inside, the volunteer table had been replaced by a folding ladder and 3 open equipment cases. The theater beyond was dark except for work lights. Someone called a sequence of numbers from the stage. I stayed in the lobby and texted, "I'm here. You invited me for the record. I'll wait out front unless you say otherwise." 2 minutes later, the black curtain opened. Jonah stepped through with his headset crooked over one ear and a coil of cable around his shoulder. He looked tired, frustrated, and relieved to see me. "Caleb." "Hi." I lifted the bag with the second spinach pie. "I brought evidence that I expected you." He came closer but stopped before touching me. The Q system failed at 4:30, not failed in a dramatic sparks and smoke way. It just decided every command meant Q96. "What's Q96? "Blue blackout. It's not appropriate for every moment." His phone had died while he used it to call the manufacturer. On his way from a hardware supplier back to the theater, he had run into Spin City and left a handwritten note with the early shift attendant. She had tucked it beside the register while making change for a customer. Sometime before Leela took over, it slipped behind the counter. "I'm sorry," he said. "I thought you'd know where I was," and then everything here kept getting louder. "You don't need to apologize for a broken Q system." "No, but I wanted to be there." The distinction settled between us. He had not forgotten. More importantly, I had not been waiting for a machine. I had been waiting for him. Someone called Jonah's name from inside. "Go," I said. "I'll sit in the back quietly enough to avoid removal." He smiled, touched 2 fingers to my wrist, and returned through the curtain. The repair took another hour. I watched Jonah work from the last row while 4 performers repeated a short scene under different arrangements of light. He listened to the stage manager, tested a command, admitted when it failed, and tried another. No one raised a voice. The emergency was ordinary. 5 people doing their jobs while a piece of aging equipment refused to cooperate. At 10 past 10, the correct light finally rose, warm amber through the painted window. Everyone applauded for 3 seconds, then began packing up. Jonah found me in the aisle, spinach pie. We ate on the edge of the stage with our feet above the empty first row. The theater had gone quiet except for a fan inside the control booth. I could have let the evening become a sweet story about missing someone and finding him. That would have been the edited version. I might be leaving for Boston in 5 weeks, I said. Jonah stopped folding the paper wrapper in his hands. Leaving how? A 3-month archival residency. I made the shortlist. I interviewed last Thursday. He looked toward the empty seats, not away from me so much as toward a place where he could arrange the information. When did you find out? The day before I came to the show. Before we kissed? Yes. His jaw tightened. He did not accuse me of planning it or suggest the kiss had been false. That would have been easier to answer. Why are you telling me tonight? He asked. Because you weren't at the laundromat, and I realized how much it mattered that you usually were. That's honest. It's also not the whole answer. I set my food down. I was afraid if I told you, everything would turn into a decision before I knew what we were. So you decided I didn't need to know. I delayed it. Caleb, his voice stayed quiet. That's a nicer verb for the same choice. I wanted to explain that we were new, that the residency was uncertain, that I had not owed him a report after 4 Thursdays. Each point was technically defensible. Together, they formed a wall I recognized. You're right, I said. Jonah rubbed the edge of the paper wrapper between his fingers. I'm not asking you to turn it down. I know. Do you? Because I don't want a grand sacrifice. I don't want you staying here and resenting me, and I don't want promises that 3 months will be easy. I just wanted the actual information while we were deciding what this was. I want to go, I said. The words hurt because they were true and because saying them felt for 1 second like choosing against him. I also want this. Then you should have trusted me with both sentences. There was nothing melodramatic about his disappointment. He did not leave the stage or tell me we were finished. He simply looked less certain of me than he had an hour earlier. My last relationship was built around eventually, he said. Eventually one of us would move. Eventually the calls would feel normal. Eventually we'd have ordinary days again. I can't do another relationship where the future stays vague because naming it might expose a problem. 3 months has an end date. Yes, that makes it different, but only if we're honest enough to say what we're trying to get back to. I thought of all the routines Daniel and I had allowed to answer questions we stopped asking. I had believed avoidance was a way to preserve peace. Really, it preserved only delay. I don't know what to call us, I said, but I know I don't want to treat you like a Thursday that will keep happening whether I choose it or not. Jonah looked at me then, his expression softened, but not enough to erase what had happened. I need time to think, he said. Okay. Not 3 months, just a couple of days. You can have them. I wanted to reach for his hand. I did not. He had asked for space, and respecting it was not a performance of goodness. It was the next honest thing available. We walked down the narrow stairs together. Outside, he waited until my train entrance was in sight. Text me when you get home, he said. I will. It was care without resolution. I understood the difference. The next morning, I told Priya I would accept the residency if it was offered. Saying it aloud clarified something I had been making unnecessarily complicated. Boston was not the enemy of whatever Jonah and I might become. My secrecy was. I had tried to avoid forcing a choice and had turned uncertainty into a private room where only I was allowed. At lunch, I opened the unsent draft on my phone and deleted it. Then I wrote a new message. I want the residency. I want to keep seeing you. I was afraid those truths would cancel each other, so I let you operate with less information than I had. That was unfair. I'm not asking you to wait, move, or pretend distance is nothing. If you want to talk, I'll bring the unedited version. I read it once and sent it before I could improve away the important parts. Jonah replied 3 hours later. Saturday, 11, the diner. Bring your calendar, archivist. He knew I was not technically an archivist. The demotion was probably intentional. Saturday morning, he was already in a booth with coffee when I arrived. There were no pancakes yet, which I took as evidence that negotiations had not begun. I sat across from him. I brought the calendar. Of course you did. Color-coded. I almost didn't come. I put the calendar on the table without opening it. Okay. Jonah wrapped both hands around his coffee. Not to punish you. I was trying to figure out whether I was reacting to you or to what happened before. What did you decide? Both. That seems fair. The server arrived. Jonah ordered pancakes. I ordered them too, removing 1 point of future theft from contention. I don't need daily calls, he said after she left. I don't need a countdown chain or matching airport pillows, but I need to know whether we are dating while you're gone or whether I'm a pleasant month you had before Boston. The question frightened me because it was answerable. I want us to be dating, I said, now while I'm gone and when I come back, exclusively if you want that too. I do. I can come back 1 weekend a month. The residency pays travel and I already checked the train schedule. You have 2 openings in Boston this fall, but I'm not assuming you'll visit around work. One of those openings has 3 days between loadout and focus. I could come then. We opened our calendars. This could have become absurdly administrative, 2 men scheduling romance between laundry and technical rehearsals. Instead, the details gave the choice. Wait. We marked 1 weekend when I would return, 1 when Jonah might visit, and an evening before I left when we would cook dinner with the basil that had somehow survived my kitchen. If one of us hates this, Jonah said, we say so before resentment becomes a personality. Agreed. If you decide you want to stay in Boston, I tell you when it becomes a thought, not after it becomes a plan. He nodded, and I won't treat wanting you here as evidence that you should give up something important. Our pancakes arrived. For a moment, we concentrated on syrup and plates and making room for the calendar beside the sugar dispenser. Then Jonah said, I was angry because I had started thinking of you as my boyfriend, and I didn't know if I was allowed to use the word. The simple admission struck deeper than a speech would have. You're allowed, I said. I'd like to use it too. He smiled, not the full, easy smile from Dryer 8, but one that arrived carefully and stayed. Good, he said, because the man whose laundry schedule I monitor was becoming difficult to explain. I reached across the table, palm up. Jonah placed his hand in mine. Can I kiss you when we get outside? I asked. You can kiss me now if you don't mind an audience of 3 servers and a man doing the crossword. I've learned the dangers of public grand gestures. Outside then. We finished breakfast first. The residency offer arrived on Tuesday at 10:14 in the morning. I read it at my workstation surrounded by headphones and gray archival boxes. Then I called Priya, accepted formally, and texted Jonah. Boston said yes, so did I. He called rather than replying. Congratulations, he said, and there was no hesitation beneath it. Thank you. How terrified are you? Professionally or personally? Dealer's choice. 7 out of 10. Reasonable, we'll discuss over laundry. The next 4 Thursdays did not become a farewell montage. They were still laundry nights. Jonah still forgot detergent once. I still brought too much food. Leela found his missing note when a roll of quarters fell behind the counter. She handed it to me with the solemnity of returning wartime correspondence. Caleb Q System Mutiny at Theater. I'm sorry, 8 is yours, J. I kept it in the pocket of my wallet, not because it proved Jonah had cared that night, but because it reminded me how easily a message could exist and still fail to reach the person who needed it. Jonah helped me choose which clothes to take to Boston. I went with him to Focus Lights for a community theater production and sat in the back while he turned an empty stage from morning to dusk. We met each other's friends in small, undramatic groups. He came to the archive after closing for staff tour Priya had arranged, and listened through studio headphones to a restored radio host introducing a song in 1983. He sounds close, Jonah said. That's the point. We did not promise to make distance romantic. We promised train numbers, honest complaints, and the right to change plans without pretending changed plans meant changed feelings. Jonah bought his Boston ticket. I put his November opening night into my calendar and requested the following Friday off. The Thursday before I left, we brought a bulky blue blanket to Spin City. It had lived on the back of my sofa for years and was large enough that Jonah insisted it needed its own machine. Washer 4, he said, assessing it like a low din, then 8 on low. 8 is always on low. That's why 8 has survived. He had arrived first, as usual. Dryer 8 was empty. A new piece of painter's tape marked its number because the old one had peeled away. Jonah stood beside it with 2 cartons of noodles and the basil plant which he had brought so I could return it to him before leaving. The plant now had 12 leaves. You kept it alive, I said. We kept it alive. You had custody on weekends. That is not how plants work. Tell that to the calendar. We fed the blanket into washer 4 and sat at the folding table. There was packing left to do at my apartment, and Jonah had a cue sheet to finish before morning. Neither of us used those facts to hurry the evening. Leela was repairing the strap on a laundry cart with silver tape. The television showed another cooking competition. 7 squeaked every 9th turn. The room was almost exactly as it had been the night I met Jonah, which made the differences easier to see. When the blanket was ready, we moved it together into dryer 8. Jonah set the temperature low and pressed start. What if it shrinks? I asked. Then Boston gets a very expensive scarf. I leaned against the machine. I'm going to miss this. The fluorescent lighting. Your disrespect for serious moments. He stepped between me and dryer 7, close enough that the squeak sounded behind his shoulder. I'm going to miss you too. There was sadness in saying it, but no accusation. Missing each other was no longer evidence that we had chosen badly. It was part of the price we had examined and agreed to pay. 3 weeks until your visit, I said. 22 days. You counted. Repetition is either a cue or a problem. Which is this? Jonah considered me a cue. He touched my cheek, giving me time to meet him. I did. The kiss was quiet and warm, witnessed only by turning dryers, Leela's tactful attention to the cart strap, and a basil plant with no respect for privacy. Dryer 8 completed its cycle without shrinking the blanket. Jonah took one end and I took the other. We folded it between us, stepping closer with each corner until the fabric became a neat blue square in our hands. For once, the routine ahead of us was something we had chosen out loud.